Uvaženi gledalci, dobro veče. Gledate specijalnu emisiju Atlas televizije. Naš gost je zamjenik pomoćnika američkog državnog sekretara za evropska i eurazijska pitanja, Hojt. Sir, good evening and welcome to Montenegro and to Atlas television.
Hvala, dobro večer.
You can speak our language as well.
Malo.
But we'll keep on talking in English. We'll do this interview in your native language.
Thank you.
Montenegrin public is expecting announcement regarding refrastructure of the government and redefinition of its goals, which will be based on the EU and NATO requirements. We have heard from our top officials that the future of our ruling coalition depends on invitation to join NATO next year. I know you met our official, our Prime Minister, our Interior Minister. What did you tell them? Can this government and this country expect that invitation in the year that follows?
Well, thank you very much for receiving me and also for your questions. I'm always glad to be back in Montenegro. It's wonderful to be here. Of course, my main purpose in coming here is to listen and to learn. I've been in Montenegro maybe about a year ago, so I have a lot to catch up on. I think NATO and EU membership is very high on the agenda for the government and for others I spoke with, including members of civil society, Speaker of Parliament, representatives of the opposition. I think everyone is very interested in seeing a more prosperous Montenegro, a Montenegro moving forward towards integration with the rest of Europe, which will bring more opportunities, more jobs for Montenegrin citizens. So we did talk in all of my meetings about the kinds of reforms, the kinds of changes that Montenegro will need to make in order to become a stronger candidate and to advance closer towards those goals of integration with EU and NATO.
Some analysts, domestic analysts, claim that Montenegro didn't obtain invitation to join NATO on the summit which was held in Wales because you did not want to provoke Russia over the Ukraine crisis. Is that true, or could these kind of statements be considered as relevant at any point?
The answer to your first question was Russia and its concerns about NATO enlargement a reason for why the United States or any other ally did not extend invitations for other countries to join NATO? The answer is absolutely not. Of course, we take into consideration all relevant factors, including geostrategic factors. But NATO is an alliance that's based on the interests of its members, of its partners. It takes into account primarily what will increase the security, the stability, the well-being of the NATO alliance and of its members and of its partners. We are not subject to veto by any country. We're not subject to the will of countries that are not in NATO. NATO is an alliance of 28 sovereign countries. So we make our decisions based on what is going to be good for the alliance. Our decision not to take in new members was based on a common assessment by all the NATO allies that the candidate countries who are trying to join NATO are making progress but still have more work to do in order to become fully ready to be invited to join.
And did Montenegro prove its willingness, if not readiness, to fulfill common partnership goals when it imposed sanctions to Russia?
Well, in general,
when it joined Western sanctions, yes.
Yes, in general.
Did you recognize our willingness to be part of the alliance?
Absolutely. Montenegro has demonstrated over the course now of several years that it is committed to joining NATO, to joining the European Union, not only by this one example that you mentioned, which is, I think, an important demonstration of Montenegro's solidarity with the members of the European Union, with countries in Eastern Europe, first and foremost Ukraine, which is a subject of aggression from Russia. We think this is an important indication of Montenegro's first understanding of realities in Europe and of the responsibilities, of countries that respect democratic principles, fundamental principles of international law, of proper, appropriate conduct of countries towards serious situations which threaten the stability and security of Europe. But beyond that, we have seen that Montenegro is taking steps to meet the criteria, meet the standards of both the European Union and of NATO in order to move forward towards joining those organizations.
But when you mention NATO in our country, people revoke NATO bombing in 1999. At the time, you worked at NATO headquarters as the Deputy Chief of Staff to Javier Solana, which is very well known in this country. How do you remember that time? What are your thoughts of those events that happened 15 years ago?
Well, let me say first that it is, of course, well known that in almost any conflict, any war, any armed conflict, there are unfortunately losses of innocent lives. And we regret, the United States, NATO, regret very much the loss of innocent civilian lives in that conflict and all others in which NATO has been involved. We stress, however, that one should remember that the cause of those tragic deaths was not NATO, but the policies and aggression by the Milosevic regime, which was causing this problem which NATO was asked to and did decide to intervene in. And thanks to the intervention by NATO, there were fewer losses of life of Kosovo civilians. There were fewer atrocities because of that intervention. So while we do very much regret the loss of innocent civilian life, it was necessary in order not only to save civilian life in Kosovo, but to prevent aggression by the Milosevic regime and to maintain the stability and security of the region. I would also just mention the last point is that NATO's decision to do so was based on a lot of difficult deliberations and reflections by the at that time 19 sovereign democratic members of NATO, who all together by consensus agreed that they had to do something, that they had to act in order to address this crisis.
Do you think that people in Montenegro can understand everything you have just explained?
I understand that there are people who may not appreciate, may not agree with what I've said. I cannot pretend to even imagine the pain and suffering that those who lost loved ones, either in Montenegro or in Serbia or in Kosovo or anywhere else where NATO has been involved. However, I would ask people to reflect upon the facts, to think about what would have happened if there had not been an intervention by NATO at that time in this part of Europe, and also to look at what has happened since, where now we have a new situation in both Kosovo and Serbia. We have the governments of those two countries.
New situation in Montenegro as well, who regained its independence back in 2006.
There's a completely new dynamic in the entire region, and I'm not claiming NATO is fully responsible for all of that, but I would say that NATO played an important role in the developments, the economic and democratic development of the region, including for Montenegro and Kosovo and Serbia.
And 15 years after that bombing, Montenegro is keen on becoming a member state of NATO. Different polls show different results regarding how many people support that intention of the government. Do you believe that at some point NATO will suggest holding a referendum so both you and we in Montenegro could receive concrete and reliable information regarding the fact how many people want us to be a member state of NATO and how many are against that?
That's really a decision for each country that is a candidate or is trying to join NATO to decide by which means it wishes to determine the will of its people. In most cases, we believe that the government of the candidate country can take responsibility and should take responsibility for making a decision of whether it is in the best interests of the country, whether it is the will of its citizens, whether a referendum is necessary. I think it's clear that there are people on both sides.
What is your impression? You told me you talked to opposition leaders, to the Speaker of the Parliament, etc. What is your impression?
Just to finish my last answer, I think it's important to have a debate. It's very important in every country that's considering to join that there be an open, candid debate. Whether a referendum is necessary or not, whether that's helpful or not, that's for the people and the government to decide. But it is important to have a full discussion. In my discussion, to answer your next question about what I heard from Speaker of Parliament, from the Prime Minister, from members of civil society, the opposition, I've heard that there is intense interest in this issue. There's a realization on the part of the government, on the part of the Speaker of Parliament. There's a strong belief that the joining of NATO, the joining of Montenegro to NATO would be a fundamental step for the country towards a more prosperous future, towards a more secure future. And this is, I think, the type of conclusion that can be drawn by the majority of citizens if there is a full and open discussion where all arguments are brought forward, not only about the past, but about the present and the future. I would recommend, as I consider myself a friend of Montenegro, I would recommend that all of Montenegro's citizens, all voters in Montenegro, look at the facts. What would be the result? What would be the benefits? What would be the downsides of joining NATO? I am confident that if there is an honest and open debate, citizens will realize that by looking at other countries in Europe who have joined NATO, countries that joined NATO very soon afterwards, and it's easy to verify this, see a growth in their economies, a growth in GDP, increased prosperity, certainly increased security. What I've also told Montenegrins who ask about what are the advantages, one very important advantage is that countries that join NATO gain a seat at one of the most important tables in international politics and international affairs. To have a voice for a country of 650,000 people, to have a voice at the same table with the United States, with Germany, with France, with other 28 other countries of NATO is incredibly important, incredibly advantageous. So I would say, without trying to make a decision for anyone, I would say to all citizens, whether here in Montenegro or Bosnia-Herzegovina or any other country, Macedonia, that is reflecting on this issue, to look at the costs and the benefits.
Also, one of the preconditions to join NATO is reform of National Security Agency. Does NATO suggest, recommend or require retirement of suspicious employees? Although half a year ago, our Ministry of Justice, Duško Marković, claimed that there are no Russian spies in Montenegrin intelligence. What are requirements of NATO regarding, as I said, suspicious employees, if there are any, in our National Security Agency?
Well, you're talking about a very specific part of a larger set of obligations, of guidelines for NATO members or countries that are trying to join.
Well, I'm trying to, because both diplomats and domestic politicians usually, when they talk about National Security Agency, they talk in some kind of general terms. So that is the reason why I'm asking this specific question.
And I'll answer it very specifically.
Thank you.
It's certainly one of a broader set of requirements that countries that join NATO must be able to safeguard confidential information shared between NATO allies about the security situation in Europe and the transatlantic area, to be able to have secure communications between capitals of NATO member countries, to be able to communicate in meetings or in written communication in a way in which information of NATO members is protected. So it is absolutely essential that all of the security services of all the NATO countries be free of any vulnerabilities from outside parties that may wish to, which are not members of NATO, which may wish to have information which is not properly obtained by these third countries.
Since we didn't obtain that invitation to join NATO in September, does it mean that right now we are not able to fulfill those requirements?
I wouldn't draw that conclusion, no. What we have said to Montenegro is that Montenegro has made tremendous progress towards joining, towards meeting the criteria for joining NATO. There is still work that NATO must do in order to gain that invitation, that we have confidence that it's moving in the right direction, and that if it continues to move in that direction and to continue making progress at the rate at which it's making progress, that it will be in a position to receive an invitation, and that at the end of 2015 there'll be another decision on whether to invite Montenegro to join. There are more than one area, there is more than one area in which we're looking for more progress from Montenegro. One is in the issue in the area of security services, reform of security services, also in the area of rule of law, and also in the area of public support for NATO membership from the citizenry. So we've touched on all those areas, and I wouldn't say there's any one particular issue that is more important than any of the others. All of them are important. All of these areas must be addressed by the people, by the government of Montenegro, in order to make the best possible case for Montenegro's joining of NATO.
One of the topics which is high on the agenda for the last 2 months is safety in Montenegro. We have had several murders in 3 different towns, students fighting over flags and nationalistic messages. Albanian embassy in Podgorica was attacked, etc. A month ago, our Interior Minister Rashko Konjevic told to the US ambassador here in Montenegro, Sue Brown, that, I quote, security in Montenegro is at the same level as it is in the US. Do you feel safe right here, right now in Podgorica? The same you would if you were, for an example, in Washington. You told me you're leaving to the US in 1 hour.
First, let me say that we believe, the United States believes very strongly in the right to free speech, the right to free assembly, the freedom of the media, and we strongly condemn any attack on any of these basic rights and freedoms. And we have called on, we continue to call on the government and the authorities of Montenegro to fully investigate any attacks on journalists or any violent incidents which remain unsolved. We think it's extremely important for any country, whether it's trying to join NATO or not, that it have a free press, free media, that there be a vibrant, active civil society, and there not be violence or intimidation or any aggression that discourages people from expressing their views, whether they're political or economic.
Does that happen in Montenegro, from what you know?
From what I know, by and large, yes. This is a country, to answer your question, your first question, and I was very glad to welcome Minister Konjevic when he visited Washington not long ago. I believe Montenegro and Podgorica also are very safe places to be. I feel just as safe, if not safer, to be in Podgorica than to be in Washington. I would say there are many parts of Washington that are probably not as safe as at Podgorica. So I absolutely feel...
Georgetown isn't part of those insecurity.
Well, there are some parts of Georgetown you might want to be careful while you're strolling in the middle of the night. But
DuPont Circle?
DuPont Circle, it's a wonderful place, but I think Podgorica has advantages in terms of security. People here are extremely warm. I feel, whenever I'm here, extremely welcome. And there's a feeling here in Podgorica, in Montenegro in general. I feel welcoming towards foreigners. of an openness towards people of different ethnic backgrounds, different religions, and it's very refreshing, and it's something that's not found everywhere in the world.
Last question for you. What is the current status of Montenegro main National Guard partnership? Is it still ongoing? Because we haven't had any news lately regarding this issue.
Yes, absolutely. No, the partnership is still very much going strong. There's a focus on cooperation in the area of logistics, on human resources and personnel. We look for ways that we can help the military of Montenegro, the defense established in Montenegro, continue its reform, its modernization, and we feel this partnership with the National Guard is extremely important and beneficial to both sides. We also gain, our National Guard also gains very much from having this relationship. We have the same kind of partnerships all over Europe. We find them extremely important, including for our joint deployments to real operations, whether it's in Afghanistan or Kosovo. There are places where our troops are able to work together using the same or similar equipment and doctrine and principles, so that we're able to work together towards increasing the security and stability, not only of this region or of Europe, but the wider world.
Sir, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. Hvala vama.
Uvaženi gledalci, bio je to Hojt iz američkog State Departmenta. Ja sam Milica Mirić i želim vam ugodnu noć. Do gledanja.